I think what makes Martin guitars very unique is number one, the history and the heritage. We've been around probably longer than most, if not all, other guitar makers.
I think many of the design elements that people take for granted in guitars and acoustic guitars in particular, many of them were actually Martin guitar inventions. The X bracing, the dreadnought shape, the triple O, the double O, the single O. These are all inventions from this building. Not many other guitar manufacturers can call upon a history like that has sort of shaped what everyone else is doing. And in many cases, many other guitar manufacturers are simply copying what Martin does. And our products are originals.
Our instruments produce excellent sound. They are incredibly high quality, and we do it consistently at a pretty big volume every day. We make over 100,000 guitars every year. That's a lot of guitars to produce at a very high quality standard, and I think we do that very, very well.
This is what the rosewood sides look like when they come in from East India. We've been dealing with the same family, the Yogi family, for many years. It's a great family. They've been friends with the Martin family, so they know what we want. They find the good stuff for us, and they cut it to the legal dimension and then wrap it in these burlap bags, and we've been getting this for as long as I've worked here. So we're lucky to have that relationship, and they've been a great partner to work with. When wood does come into the Martin factory, it's at different levels of humidity. Some of it's straight out of the jungle. Some of it may be too dry. What we shoot for is about 6% bound moisture content. That seems to be the ultimate for getting it to bend correctly, and at the same time keeping it stable when it leaves. We don't cure it right. We don't want it moving around in your showroom, or when customers start playing, then you're into setups and problems like that. So curing the wood is important. What they're doing here is matching backs to side, making sure the grain patterns and colors look correct, as well as grading as well. So there's some grading work going on here. Sitka spruce is the most plentiful and most popular. That's what's utilized on the 18s and the 28s. That comes from the Pacific Northwest, so that forest starts in Alaska and works its way down to Washington State. We've had a consistent source of spruce coming out of there for quite some time, and it continues to go. There's a lot of replanting efforts and things like that to keep the sources going. So. She's looking for any internal defects, because one of the bad things is if you can't see what's inside the wood and we start to build a guitar and you start to sand into it later in the process, that's not good. So she's going to look for anything that might come up later in the process that's going to not meet our quality specification.
I don't think guitar players care that a log was cut in half by a machine as opposed to a handsaw. I don't think that matters at all. But I think when you're working on frets and you're working on the setup, you're neck fitting the instrument, things that affect the playability, I think that's where guitar players want to know that human eyes are looking at it, are touching it, and that there's some element of experience at work in the product.
We don't process raw logs here at Martin Guitar. Typically we buy wood and board feed, especially for necks. That typically comes from a wood distributor or one of our sources. The ultimate we're looking for is 12-quarter mahogany board. So what that means is there's 12 1/4 of an inch. That's how much thickness you need to make a complete, full, solid neck. What we'll do is we then, once this is cut, we cut it into this shape. And then what we'll do is trace out 3 neck billets. We do that by hand. Then these billets will be cut out by hand. This is what essentially it looks like coming off the saw. And when it goes on the CNC machine, this is kind of what it looks like when it comes off. This would be the first 7-axis CNC machine that we're aware of being utilized in guitar construction. And that really gives us a very nice finished product. It's a balance of handwork and technology, but this is definitely part of the technology side.
It's still an art, a craft. It's a product, and we do use machines and we use a lot of modern machinery to do some of the big woodworking. In the end, I think guitar players and artists want to know that a human hand is touching the product, that it feels what they feel when they're playing. They want to feel the final shape. You don't want the guitar to feel like a machine-made piece of product that's disposable. We view our guitars as works of art, and works of art are always made by hand. Works of art are not made by machines.
Fingerboards, primarily we use ebony on that, some rosewood fingerboards as well. Sourcing ebony has always been a challenge along with a lot of the other tropical hardwood. That's a challenge with us today. We have an extensive department that researches any wood purchase. We're looking for all the right paperwork, making sure this wood is legal, making sure that it's been cut to the proper dimensions to leave the countries. Coming out of places like India, for example, the wood has to be cut down to a certain dimension to be legally sold to anyone outside of India. And that's to keep the labor and the jobs in India rather than just cutting trees and sending them out.
When Martin first developed the X-Brace Madame de Goni back in the 1800s, I think it's important to note that created a unique sound for an acoustic guitar, that it was the first time people were hearing it that way, and it became important, obviously more important, when steel strings came along in the 1920s, I believe that was. It was perfectly set up for steel string sounding instruments. If you think of the entire instrument as a stereo speaker, the top of the guitar is like the speaker cone, and that's what moves. And the X-Brace is sort of the engine of that speaker. And CF was lucky to create something that really allowed that speaker cone to move in a way that was ready for modern music, as opposed to, say, fan bracing, which just can't create very much volume.
Bracing is pretty much everything when you're trying to generate tone in a guitar. Placement is important. That can have a dramatic effect on bass and treble, along with the scalloping and the pointing of the braces. Most of the time, the species of wood utilized for the brace will match the top. There are some exceptions to that where we might put some Adirondack bracing underneath some Sitka spruce, but those exceptions are small.
Sometimes when you get the ingredients just right in a certain recipe, it always seems to work. Spruce, rosewood, and X-bracing, they just go together. It's like bread and butter. They work well all the time. It doesn't matter what size or what shape you make it, those elements just seem to work. We're lucky we found it. A lot of our employees have been here a long time. I've been here for 20 years. That's not very long for Martin. We have lots of employees who have been here 30, 40 years. And I think over that length of time, obviously, you're going to become an incredible expert at what you do. They just see things over and over again that maybe I wouldn't notice, or maybe the casual player might not notice, and they just get it done. They're incredible.
People really care about each other at Martin. We care about our partners a lot. We need people at the heart of what we do. The passion is really important. That's what always drives me when I think about the people we have. The passion they show, the craftsmanship, that's what Martin means to me.
I don't think you can reinvent the acoustic guitar any more than you can reinvent the violin or reinvent a piano. I do think it's possible to improve. I do think it's possible to find new inspirations within the acoustic guitar. You can make changes around the edges, but it is what it is, and that's what we love about it.
We take a look in here, some of the earliest guitars we have. This would be an example, definitely one of the earliest. And you can see over here, some of the backstrip and inlay designs that were available at the time were just really beautiful. You know, when Mr. Martin would move from New York City to Pennsylvania, he would start in Cherry Hill, which is probably right up the hill from this factory on the left-hand side. This would be where Mr. Martin would come up with the earliest X-Brace guitar, building it for Madame de Goni. We're not really sure how he came up with that design or what his inspiration for it was, but obviously he saw something in that design, moved away from what was traditional before, came up with that, and that's been history in our company ever since. That's been the platform is the X-Brace. So this would be an example of what a workbench would look like in the 1830s. We do believe that that tool case is actually the original tool case that CF Sr. brought with him when he made the journey from Markneukirchen to New York. Gene Autry was known to be on a horse, had a big Martin guitar, D45 in front of him, and that sort of set the stage for the D45. This one over here would be one of my favorite guitars, 39 00042. Almost the same exact guitar that Clapton would have played on his MTV Unplugged performance. 31 of these were made, super rare, so that's a really nice piece. We've done a lot of work off of that one, taking a look at it, seeing how it was built, making sure our specifications on our museum guitars are correct. Over here, this one is the pinnacle of our collection for the most part. This is the pre-war D45. There's a pretty good history behind this one if you take a look at it. Fred Clay brought his Martin guitar into Leo Fender's Fullerton, California shop, and having trouble at the time, people weren't hearing him play on stage. Leo retrofitted the Martin with a magnetic pickup that he had developed for steel slide guitars, lap guitars. This is the first known attempt for Leo Fender to amplify a guitar. The Kurt Cobain, the Grandpa D18, 1953, and also a 12-string 28 that was destroyed by Courtney Love. We loaned that to her, and apparently she got angry on stage and hit somebody with it, so it was sent back to us in that condition. We've lost a few guitars to artists. Some of them are nice about it and pay for it. Another interesting piece, the actual backpacker that was in the space shuttle. One of my favorite guitars for sure is the serial number 1,000,000. The whole theme of this guitar was just amazing, and the inlay work by Larry Robinson is one of the nicest I've seen come from him.
Is the museum a source of inspiration for the work? Yes, it is. We're in here all the time looking at old guitars, trying to figure out what made them special, what made them unique. We all have our personal favorites within the museum. It's a never-ending source of inspiration because so many of these instruments were built before there was electricity. It's just hard to believe. Built before World War I, built before World War II, and they're still incredible instruments. I mean, they're still so much fun to play. They still sound fantastic. And when you see that, how can you not be inspired? You have to be inspired by that. And it also reminds you that the instruments that you're creating today, the instruments that you're designing someday may hang in this museum. And somebody 50, 100 years from now may be looking at your guitars and gaining some inspiration from those instruments.
This is an OM45 Deluxe 1930. This would have been the beginning of actually the Authentic series. So at this point in the company, we're starting to talk about very accurate reproductions of some of the museum instruments that we have in the collection. That was something that Chris wanted us to really focus on to celebrate our history. A lot of times when we made reproductions, there was always questions about, are we correct in the way we're building it? And the forums were active at that time with a lot of experts questioning whether we actually were building the recreations correctly. So one of the things we try to do is when we do recreate an authentic guitar, we actually have an original museum piece in our collection that guitar specifications would be based off of. And our feeling is that if we're actually recreating an instrument that we own and we can verify it's original, then it takes the subjectivity out of how accurate it is. The patterns and the type of wear that we see in the museum are what we put on the aged guitar. So it's not just random denting a guitar or scratching it. There's definitely wear patterns that we see on vintage guitars that we incorporate in our newer pieces. We always had a great relationship with Johnny Cash. He was so enamored when he got his first Martin limited edition. He just looked at her and said, "Wow, I really, really made it." We always took that as quite a great compliment from such a great artist. There's always a story too about the black guitar. The word is that Johnny Cash wanted a black Martin guitar. I think it was Chris's grandfather at the time basically said, "No, we don't paint black guitars. The wood is far too beautiful for us to cover up." There were a few guys in the spray booth who were big Johnny Cash fans that knew he wanted it, so they sort of painted it black without anybody knowing, and it went to Mr. Cash. And I believe, if I remember correctly, Chris's grandfather was watching TV one night and happened to see this guitar on stage, and I don't think he said much about it, but we ended up getting it to him, and he got his black guitar, and history ever since.
Over 190 years, lots of artists have touched Martin guitars, and we are always very proud and honored with our associations with artists. But to name a few, Elvis Presley, Eric Clapton, Joan Baez, Sting, Mark Knopfler, and you name it, the list goes on. And I think the beautiful thing is that the artists we have worked with and are working with, they cover so many genres. They come from all over the world. And as I mentioned, we are very proud and honored to collaborate very closely with these artists and continue to do so.
All acoustic guitars sound like acoustic guitars. That would be like saying all cars are the same. But we all know that a Mercedes is not like a Ferrari. A Martin guitar is not like any other acoustic guitar. It just has its own unique sound and feel. It's Neil Young, it's Eric Clapton, it's John Mayer, it's all the songs you love. That's the sound I hear in my head. When I play a Martin guitar in my office, that's the sound. You can only get that sound from a Martin guitar. I still smile when I play a new guitar. That feeling is unique. You don't get that from everything. I love it when we go meet an artist and go talk to someone. I mentioned John Mayer earlier. You sit down with John and you talk to him and he opens the case and a smile on his face, he goes, "Ah." And then he starts playing in front of you. Just to know you can bring that level of happiness to someone and that later you're going to hear that guitar on a record that everyone is singing along to at a concert, that's a pretty good feeling. And to know you can share that with everyone. The same guitar John Mayer buys and plays, the one where he opens it up and looks at it and gets excited, that is the same guitar that you can buy at Stars Music. We don't make them any different for John than we make them for you. I mean, how many products in the world are like that? Not many.